Do you like big guns? Yes, guns that have multiple uses and lots of health? Guns that can be stopped by using a flamethrower?
What?
Of course, when someone says artillery, you immediately think of a large gun that was used during the Great War or World War II, whereby the howitzers took centre stage and essentially blew everything to smithereens. In Hogs of War, the likes of pillboxes and artillery work as a sentry, with a pivot point of 360 degrees that allows for full coverage of the map, but is deeply dependent on the vehicle's position, as it just can be easily blocked by the landscape. Just as it is. So the major difference between the pillbox and artillery though is the amount of resources each gun uses, as the artillery boasts a wide array of weaponry compared to the pillbox that simply has the machine gun and flamethrower combo. Also, the artillery is not limited by its sightlines or its range, as the majority of the shells that it uses can be launched at a lengthy distance to the targets that are far away. So what does the artillery have in terms of an arsenal? What are its major strengths and weaknesses, and how can you utilize it to its fullest capabilities? Well, this gun is armed with 6 different types of shells. You've got the long range shell. This does a maximum of 60 damage, and as its name implies, it is the shell that can indeed be launched the furthest. It is also the only shell that can be used more than once, with each piece of artillery having ×3 of this shell. Then you got yourselves a mine shell, which if the name doesn't give it away already, then I don't know what will, but upon impact of this shell, an initial 25 damage will be done, and after that first explosion, a set of mines will be dropped from where the explosion occurred, leaving any nearby pigs vulnerable to suddenly taking damage. Then there's the gas shell. Now this works in the same way as a normal gas grenade, dealing 15 damage to any nearby targets upon impact, but a major plus for this shell is that it does have a much larger radius, as it cannot rely on the shell to roll around like the gas grenade does. So as soon as the shell hits the battlefield, any nearby targets are poisoned, and this item has a single use. Next up we have the big one of the fire range shell. This works in the same fashion as the F-Rain Airstrike, bursting into a rain of fire that can inflict major damage onto a target. That is, if the flames actually touch the frickin' pig, because I find that although this weapon is very strong against other nearby vehicles, it is very unreliable against other pigs, unless the environment is positioned in a certain way. And what I mean by this is if the artillery has the high ground and is launching the shell into an enclosed trench or area, that's when it's at its strongest, because all of the fire kind of rolls downhill and converges onto the pig that is positioned there. This item also has a single use. Next up is the big daddy of the 1,000-pound shell. This is the most powerful weapon the artillery has, but is equally one that requires enemies to be close in terms of proximity. Seeing as the shell weighs so much, it can't actually travel that far when you use it, so even at the fullest amount of power, the shell will only travel half the distance of an ordinary shell. This item can only be used once. Last but indeed not least is the shock shell. Now this shell is one that has had me confused for some time, because if it impacts with a pig like full on in the face, it will do a maximum of between 7 and 14 damage. The only plus you get from this shell is the fact that it launches the pig far off into the sky. It's a cool feature, but in many ways it seems extremely situational, as the only time you'd need to knock a pig up into the air is if you wanted to nudge them off the map, and I tend to use this shell as a last resort, usually when I see an enemy pig with very low health and I don't want to waste my other heavier shells on them. So overall, the artillery has a mixture of all key weapons from within Hogs of War. Within the single player campaign, you come across these guns in multiple levels, usually with the additional task of having to destroy them. I tend to use them to my advantage, seeking to remove the most important pigs first, before then focusing on the main objective of actually blowing them up. Most of the time there will be items within the mission that are put there specifically to assist you in taking down these artillery positions, the most notable one of course being the Super TNT, which does a maximum damage of 200 HP. But what can you do if you don't have Super TNT? What exactly can you do to combat against this beast? Ironically, the same weapons that are used in the pillbox are the perfect combination against the artillery. The machine gun, both normal and heavy, will either do 4 or 8 damage per shot, and the flamethrower will do the same 8 damage, which as we know is a lot when sprayed over a vehicle. The best piece of advice I can give you: do not get close to this gun unless you know you can take it down within 2 turns. Otherwise, as I've mentioned, the enemy will have a couple of ways of being able to dispatch you with ease, and as I've stated before in previous campaign videos, the heavy weapons and engineer class are the best at dealing with artillery, as they have the big impact weapons. The only problem with the engineer class though is needing to be close up to the target, unless of course you have shrapnel grenades, but those don't come in until the later missions. It's also interesting to note that if you position one of your pigs on top of an enemy's artillery, when it comes to their turn they will instantly skip it, which is kind of funky. So to summarize, the artillery should not be messed with unless you are completely sure what your plan is going forward into the match. You can't just decide to take on an artillery position without the knowledge of how they might respond and what you can do to combat against them. If you don't have a mortar, bazooka, airburst or TNT, don't try and take them on. Instead, get your pigs to cover and ensure that healing is given to those who need it. If you manage to get yourself a piece of artillery, then congratulations, you now have a major one-up against your opponent, as the 100 or sometimes 200 health the artillery acts as armor for the pig inside. Of course, use your shells wisely and indeed sparingly, get to grips with the maximum distance each shell can travel, and of course, as always, have fun. All in all guys, that's going to wrap everything up. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please let me know your opinions on the artillery in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts on them. Let's get discussion going as we always do. And in the meantime, I will catch you all later for the next one.